Orope, the White Snake, and Pekari, the Azure Fish are the first two novels in the Whispers of the Gods series. Orope begins in the Sea of Sand, inhabited by the Gogepe, the Whispers of the Gods. They have seen a vision. The gods are furious that the old ways have been forgotten and will destroy the world in a flood unless the Gogepe can convince the great kingdoms to change their ways. 3 are chosen, Tersh, Shadi, and the young Kareth. Each one is tasked with reaching one of the empires and convincing their leaders to heed their word and appease the gods. Shadi travels to the dense jungles. The people there have a good life, with plentiful food and an impressive society where pyramids are a common sight among the trees. But soon Shadi learns that they have a dark side, performing human sacrifices. Shadi travels north with 2 princes, hoping to reach their leader in the faraway capital, the Red Pyramid. But a terrible accident at the end of Orope leaves his future uncertain. Tersh and Kareth travel together to Mahat, the most powerful of all the lands, its empire flourishing on the banks of the Hiperu River. They meet the merchant Samaki and his first mate Tuhark, who are struggling to sell their cargo. They agree to take the 2 Gogepe north to the capital, Napata. Leaving Kareth to complete his mission in Napata, the others continue north to the mountain kingdom of Mataway, and Kareth comes to a rude awakening that without Tersh's guidance or Samaki's help, it will be far harder than he ever thought to complete his mission. Samaki and Tuhark return south, leaving Tersh in a city that fears and despises her people. Her life in danger, Tersh must fight to survive. The novel focuses on the difficulty of the journey, not only traversing massive distances, but dealing with prejudices as well as learning new languages and trying to overcome culture shock. In Pekari The Azure Fish, the story continues in full force. We see the introduction of new characters and locations, like Kasara, the princess of the mountain, and Tuthalia, a questionable character who leads Tersh through the mountains, Kayset, a mysterious warrior from deep in the jungle, and we finally reach the legendary Red Pyramid. And now I'd like to read you an excerpt from Pekari The Azure Fish. O glorious princess, excuse the interruption of your lowly servant. Kasara opened her eyes to see a middle-aged man bowing low to the ground. Perithos. He was not one of the Matawega. He came from the Cephian Islands, somewhere in the Middle Sea. He had arrived in Mataway a few years ago. He said he came for the bronze produced here, for the metal was cheap in the mountains, and he used it to make sculptures. He was taller than most men in Mataway, thinner as well, his brow more pronounced and his eyes wide and bright. His long limbs were wrapped in the silks he had brought with him, though age had frayed the once fine stitch, and he often wore a muddy wool cloak over them anyway to stave off the cold. His hair was golden, with the slightest hint of red, though it was speckled by gray hairs. She had always thought he was quite ugly. I hear you have finished. She tried to smile again, but the air was still too cold for smiles. Yes, my princess. The queen will be most pleased when she sees our invention. He motioned towards the main entrance. Pray I will be pleased to see it, she ordered, standing up. She turned to a guard. Have my cloak fetched for me. Once she had the long wool cloaked, lined with soft mountain fur, wrapped around her frail body, she followed Perithos out of the queen's hall. Perithos prattled on about his workmanship, and she nodded politely, but listened not to a single word he said. She exited onto the stone plaza, steep stone steps descending before her. From the top she could see the wide, low city, made from the dark mountain stones. The city roads had been built much the same as the halls in the castle, with the intention of confusing and misleading any invading army. The kings who built Nesete only had one thought in mind: creating an impenetrable city. It would have been a commendable feat, if not for the fact that being in the highest valley in the mountains had kept any army from marching on their walls, though the usurpers were certainly poised to do so. The usurpers. She wrung her hands together as she walked down the steps with Perithos. This invention was for them. The Cephian was getting more excited the closer they got. She could see it now. It was just to the right of the main plaza. They had built a raised dais for it, in the middle of which was a large fire pit, and straddling the pit was a large bronze ram, its beautiful curved horns encircling its head and glinting in the midday sun. Its face looked focused, almost angry. She chose a ram to honor the first Kisara, who had ridden to the hall of 1,000 gods on the back of a white ram. When she took that cursed city again, she would march the usurpers to her bronze ram. It was a giant of a ram. She wanted to make sure both the usurpers would fit inside together. But Perithos had gone even above her expectations. As she opened the door on its side, she saw that 4 or 5 men could fit easily inside. A few other people were gathered around, admiring it with awe on their faces. As you requested, the screams of whoever you place inside will travel through the pipes and emerge from the nostrils to sound like a great bellowing beast. Perithos smiled proudly. Are you certain? She gave him a sideways glance. Of course, I tested it extensively. He looked offended. He always looked offended when he wasn't being praised. She hated pompous men. Show me. He laughed, sticking his head inside, and gave a half-hearted scream. No, her voice cracked like a thunderclap. Get in and do it properly. His laughter suddenly became very nervous. He looked around at the people who watched with curious eyes. Though his eyes fell mostly on the guards coming up behind Kisara, he couldn't refuse her. Of course. He cleared his throat, putting his arms on either side of the entrance, one foot inside and pulling himself in. He sat as close to the open door without falling back out. Again he tried screaming, and she started to hear weak bellowing coming from the ram's nostrils. No, no, she sighed loudly. It's too quiet. Well, Perithos seemed to pale as he sat in the belly of the beast. The door must be closed for the full effect. Ah, she smiled, then looked to a guard on her right. Close the door. The guard moved faster than Perithos could react. In a moment the door closed and Perithos' nervous face disappeared. A strong bar was placed over the entrance. Perithos, tell me, have you ever heard a dying man scream? Kisara asked loudly. Through the door a weak reply came. No, princess. Is it something you cannot replicate on command? You, she pointed to the same guard, light the pyre. Princess? Perithos called, perhaps not having heard her. The light of red fire began to dance underneath the ram, and the guard stepped back. Everyone began to back away as the fire grew, worry and excitement etched on their faces. Banging started coming from inside the ram. Princess? Princess! Perithos called. The fire grew, going so high that it began to blacken the ram halfway up its hinds. Perithos began to scream, and the ram began to bellow. She frowned. It was still too quiet. Stoke the fire, she said quickly. And then it happened, the moment when Perithos realized that she would not open the door, and his death rattle came screaming out of the ram, converted and changed into a monstrous bellow. She looked around at the faces watching, their eyes wide with terror, and felt the smile creep across her face. She realized this was the first time she had felt warm in years. And if you want to finish the rest, you'll have to buy a copy of Pekari The Azure Fish.